definition of DRT, which many of you will know, it's basically running public buses like an Uber, and more about that analogy later. That can be a big step forward for transportation equity. And the 3 points I'm going to make to you today are that a software platform like ours can allow you to run travel surveys in a digital way that in turn allows us to understand how DRT can impact transportation equity or equality, and then how my wonderful colleagues, some of which are in the audience today, can then design our products better to make every ride possible, which is our mission at Spare. So before I start, very shortly, actually Viveka's last slide, which was about who we do it for, why does Router exist? It exists for a teenage girl wanting to go home after a party, or somebody going to an elderly care home. The way that typically transportation agencies have collected data to know about this stuff in the past is through travel surveys that are usually very expensive and difficult logistically to kind of collect. So we make use of the fact that we are a digital platform to send out surveys on a mass scale at virtually zero cost to find out who people are that are traveling and how they travel. And we send them these things via, in the app, via SMS, sometimes we call them. And we've run now 6 surveys, and we've had over 10,000 respondents, over 40 services worldwide in 6 countries. And what makes this different, I think, to the kinds of surveys that PTAs have traditionally collected is that we compare that data of who people are with their actual travel patterns, because we have that information in our platform. We keep everything anonymized and sufficiently private, but we're able to collect some really intricate, detailed data that I'm going to share with you now. So I'm going to cover 4 different aspects of equity, 1 graph for each, and this first one is about disability. And I'll point you to the bar on the right-hand side, the green one. In our surveys, we asked people whether they had used on-demand before they ever rode with our DRT service. And of those who have, people who have ridden transit before, the average prevalence of disability is 18%, which is actually fairly high already. But among people who say they'd never used transit before ever riding with a Spare powered service, 30% of people have a disability. Now, I actually think this is a very simple, boring bar chart in many ways, but it's also one of the most powerful to show that we are creating the possibility of rides through DRT for people who were historically excluded from transit. So I'm a big fan of this slide. A second one now is about gender. Sylvain mentioned that there are all these different angles. Gender I could talk about in many different ways. We have lots of data that's interesting to delve into, but this one I think is really important as well. Now, typically when a DRT service gets implemented in a city, one of the major worries for PTAs is, are you going to cannibalize other modes of transportation, especially sustainable ones like cycling and walking? And the answer is sometimes yes, unfortunately. But this graph shows that depending if you're a man or a woman, your trips are cannibalized in a different way. So for men, their trips are replaced kind of evenly throughout the day for walking, whereas women, increasingly throughout the day, they replace their walking trips with DRT. And there are certain difficulties with that in terms of congestion on the road, but of course what this means is that women are able to replace potentially unsafe walking trips at times of the day when they'd rather not be walking, which again is a form of redressing inequities in the transportation system. Now this one's a bit of a complex one, there's lots going on, but basically there are 3 graphs, each of which show the way that people travel for different trip types: commuting, shopping, and healthcare. And what we split up here is high-income and low-income riders, again, because we can ask people these questions. And what you'll notice is that high-income riders ride in very peaky ways. So there's only 1 or 2 major times of the day when high-income riders ride, whereas low-income riders ride fairly evenly across the day. Why is that important? Because you can actually tailor, for example, pricing according to how you want to subsidize your transport or not. And I'll finish on my kind of data slides with ethnicity. This left-hand map basically shows where people have responded they would have taken that DRT ride on public transit had DRT not been available. What would that trip have taken them on a bus or on trains? And people who saved up to 30 minutes are in red, and people who saved more than 60 minutes by riding with DRT are in yellow. And what you'll notice is there's clearly a geographical pattern here where people in the suburbs are saving far more time with DRT. Great in terms of coverage, equity. But also on the right-hand side, you'll see a graph that the people, if you split out the people who save under 30 minutes or more than 30 minutes thanks to DRT, there's a clear difference in ethnicity, where Black and African American riders in this particular city in Canada kind of disproportionately benefited from the introduction of DRT. Now again, I think that's a big win for DRT. Now I'm going to wrap up with a bit of a showcase of what I think is really exciting that's happening at Spare, which I'm pretty sure you won't see anywhere else at the conference with our competitors, which is this product called Spare Open Fleets, which in a nutshell makes use of the fact that people like Sylvain exist and are an umbrella organisation for TNCs, ride-hailing companies, taxis, which are typically very difficult for PTAs, public transit authorities, to access. Now, if you're able to expand your supply as a PTA without investing in additional vehicles, you do that, right? And Open Fleets allows you to do that. So, you basically integrate all other vehicles that are on the road that are non-private into the transportation system, and it allows you to basically deploy dedicated vehicles, the ones that exist for the public transit authority anyway, on high productivity routes, and then send inefficient trips out to these non-dedicated providers. And that essentially results in more equitable access to services for everyone. Lower wait times, wider coverage, and longer service hours. And I'll give an example, one of my favorite examples actually, from Collin County Transit, which is in Texas in the US. And this screenshot from Google gets at the nub of the problem. In a city like this, these two destinations are separated by 8 minutes of driving, 2.5 hours of walking, not that you'd want to do that in the Texan heat, and 0 public transit options. So we worked at Collin County Transit to introduce a DRT system, a microtransit system as it's known, but then introduced Open Fleets 18 weeks later. And this graph shows you the impact of that. At the beginning, we had fairly good average wait times of about 30 minutes. And when we introduced Open Fleets, when we made use of Uber and Lyft locally, suddenly 50% lower wait times. And that's just because you're making use of vehicles that are out there waiting for your riders anyway. The final piece to this is a fairly complex graph, but if you follow the yellow line, this is the cost per trip that it takes to run a dedicated fleet. It's sort of slightly gone up over time, but it's basically stayed at $40 to $50. At week 18, when we introduced the Lyft fleet in pink, which has much lower average costs anyway because of the pricing structure for Lyft, the average cost per trip has gone down by 47% over the subsequent 40 or so weeks. It's a massive deal, and I'm very happy to talk about this more. I think it's a real innovation in the space, and this is how you build in transportation equity into how you design a product. So my takeaways, I'm flashing 0. DRT, I think, does deliver huge wins for marginalised populations along those 4 axes that I showed. Travel surveys are really simple, but really and easy to deploy, but they give you a lot of understanding on your ridership. And Spare Open Fleets, I'll bang on about it again, is a big step actually for transportation equity because it allows you to deliver affordable transportation for very underserved communities, and I think that's a big win for everyone. Thank you so much.